The deepest collapse in a person's life rarely begins with noise. It often begins in silence, when the things that once gave life meaning suddenly feel empty, and the person you used to be no longer feels real. This is what many people call the dark night of the soul, but most people misunderstand it. They think it is only sadness. They think it is only depression, failure, heartbreak, or loneliness. But in its deeper meaning, it is the moment when your old identity begins to fall apart because it can no longer carry the truth of who you are becoming. The phrase became known through a Spanish poet and mystic named John of the Cross in the 16th century, but the experience itself is far older than any name given to it. Across history, people have described the same inner collapse after loss, betrayal, illness, exile, failure, or a sudden crisis of meaning. A person reaches a point where success no longer satisfies them, people no longer distract them, and the old ways of escaping pain stop working. That is why the dark night feels so terrifying. It does not simply take away comfort, it takes away the illusions that made comfort possible. Your motivation disappears, your old dreams feel lifeless. The people you once depended on may start feeling distant. Even your own thoughts can become unfamiliar, as if the mind that once guided you has turned into a room with no light. But this video is not about fear. It is about what this darkness actually turns you into. You will learn why the dark night does not always destroy a person, why it removes false versions of the self, why it makes shallow living impossible, and why the person who comes out of it often becomes calmer, clearer, quieter, and harder to control. You will also understand why this experience can feel like losing everything, while underneath the surface it is teaching you how to stop living for approval, stop needing every answer, stop begging to be understood, and stop abandoning yourself just to keep peace with people who never protected yours. Stay with this video until the end because the final part reveals the most important truth. The dark night does not turn you into a perfect person. It turns you into a real one. And once that real version begins to rise, life cannot pull you back into the same sleep again. So if you are going through a season where your heart feels tired, your mind feels heavy, and your old life no longer feels like home, this message may help you understand what is really happening inside you. Welcome to our channel, where we explore deep psychology, inner growth, emotional wisdom, and the hidden changes that shape who we become. Subscribe now, because the person you are becoming may need this kind of truth more than ever. There comes a moment in the dark night when the outside world may still look the same, but inside a quiet truth begins to rise, and that truth does not ask for permission, it does not arrive gently, it does not make life easy at first. It enters like a silent force that starts touching every corner of your life, every habit, every relationship, every dream, every belief, and every version of yourself you created just to survive. The first thing the dark night changes is not your routine. It changes your ability to lie to yourself. Before it happens, a person can live for years inside a life that looks normal from the outside but feels heavy on the inside. They can wake up, work, smile, answer messages, keep promises, meet people, chase goals, and still feel a quiet emptiness following them everywhere. They may tell themselves they are fine because nothing obvious is falling apart. They may tell themselves they are happy because other people think their life looks good. They may tell themselves they are strong because they never break down in front of anyone. But the body knows, the heart knows, the soul knows when peace is only a performance. This is why the dark night feels so painful in the beginning. It does not only expose what is wrong around you, it exposes what has been false inside you. It shows you the moments when you laughed just to avoid conflict. It shows you the dreams you chased because someone else praised them. It shows you the relationships you held on to because loneliness scared you more than disrespect. It shows you the person you became because approval felt safer than honesty. And once this truth begins to appear, pretending becomes almost impossible. You may try to return to the old version of yourself. You may try to act like everything is fine. You may try to enjoy the same conversations, the same distractions, the same plans, the same people, the same goals, but something inside you no longer cooperates. The mask that once helped you move through life begins to feel too heavy. The smile feels forced. The silence feels painful. The approval that once gave you comfort starts feeling weak. The success that once made you proud starts feeling shallow. The relationships that once made you feel needed start revealing how unseen you really were. This is not because you suddenly became negative, it is because you became honest. The dark night has a way of removing the soft lies that once protected you from deeper pain. It brings you face to face with the truth that many people avoid for a lifetime. Not every life that looks peaceful is truly peaceful. Not every connection that feels familiar is healthy. Not every goal that brings praise brings meaning, and not every version of you that survives is truly alive. Before the dark night, you may live through habits more than awareness. You may repeat choices because they are known, not because they are right. You may stay where you are because change feels dangerous. You may keep giving because being needed feels like love. You may keep achieving because being admired feels like safety. You may keep explaining because being misunderstood feels unbearable. But during the dark night, these patterns start breaking apart. The old comfort loses its power. The old distractions stop working. The old identity stops fitting. This is why people often describe the season as confusing. It is not only sadness, it is not only tiredness, it is not only the pain of one event, it is the slow collapse of every story you used to hold yourself together. You begin to notice how much of your life was built around avoiding one feeling. Some people build their whole identity around avoiding rejection. Some build it around avoiding failure. Some build it around avoiding loneliness. Some build it around avoiding shame. Some build it around avoiding the fear of being ordinary, unloved, unseen, or unwanted. And when the dark night begins, it takes you directly into the feeling you spent years escaping. This is why it can feel cruel. It brings silence when you used noise to survive. It brings emptiness when you used achievement to feel valuable. It brings distance when you used people to feel whole. It brings uncertainty when you used control to feel safe. But underneath all of this, the dark night is not only taking things away, it is removing the false ground under your feet so you can finally stand on something real. It teaches you that pretending may protect your image, but it slowly destroys your inner life. It teaches you that fake peace is not peace, it is delayed pain. It teaches you that every time you betray yourself to keep something alive, a part of you becomes quieter, and eventually that quiet part begins to ache. The dark night is often the moment when that ache becomes too loud to ignore. You may look at your life and wonder why the things that used to matter no longer move you. You may wonder why you feel tired around people you used to call close. You may wonder why success feels empty even after you worked so hard for it. You may wonder why the future you once wanted now feels like a cage. This is where fear enters, because the mind does not like losing old meanings. It wants simple answers. It wants to fix the discomfort quickly. It wants to label the pain as a problem and escape it. But the dark night does not allow a quick escape. It slows you down. It forces you to sit with the truth. It makes the old life feel too small, but the new life is not yet clear. This space between what no longer fits and what has not yet formed is one of the hardest parts of inner transformation. You are not who you were, but you do not yet know who you are becoming. And in that space, pretending becomes impossible, because pretending belongs to the old self. The old self knew how to perform. The old self knew how to please. The old self knew how to survive by shaping itself around other people's expectations. The old self knew how to smile while breaking inside. But the dark night begins to strip that away. It makes you allergic to falsehood. It makes you uncomfortable with shallow conversations. It makes you tired of proving your worth. It makes you less willing to trade your peace for acceptance. People around you may not understand this change. They may think you became distant. They may think you became difficult. They may think you became too serious, too quiet, too different, or too hard to reach. But often you are not becoming worse. You are becoming less able to abandon yourself. You are becoming less available for roles that were built on your silence. You are becoming less willing to carry connections that only survived because you kept lowering your needs. That is why the dark night can change your relationships before you even say anything. Your energy changes first. You stop laughing at things that hurt you. You stop forcing warmth where there is no respect. You stop chasing people who only notice you when you disappear. You stop explaining pain to people who benefit from not understanding it. And this does not happen because you suddenly stop caring. It happens because the part of you that used to keep pretending begins to run out of strength. There is a deep exhaustion that comes from living as a version of yourself that is acceptable to everyone except your own soul. And once that exhaustion becomes clear, you cannot unsee it. You begin to ask deeper questions. You begin to wonder how much of your life was chosen by you and how much was shaped by fear. You begin to wonder how many dreams were truly yours and how many were inherited from people who never asked who you really were. You begin to wonder how many relationships were built on love and how many were built on your usefulness. This is where the next layer begins, because once the mask falls, the identity behind the mask begins to shake. The dark night does not only make you stop pretending, it starts asking who you are without the performance. And this question can feel like standing in an empty room after years of noise. Who are you when you are not being praised? Who are you when nobody needs you? Who are you when you are not fixing, saving, pleasing, achieving, proving, or hiding? Who are you when the roles that once gave your life shape no longer feel honest? This is where the dark night turns into an identity crisis. Not because you have no identity, but because the identity you were using was built from old fears. Many people do not realize how much of their self-image is built around survival. A person may call themselves strong, but sometimes strength means they learned not to ask for help. A person may call themselves kind, but sometimes kindness means they learned to ignore their own needs. A person may call themselves independent, but sometimes independence means they learned not to trust anyone. A person may call themselves loyal, but sometimes loyalty means they learned to stay even when staying was hurting them. A person may call themselves successful, but sometimes success means they learn to outrun shame. The dark night reveals the hidden pain behind the identity. It shows you that some parts of yourself were not born from freedom. They were born from adaptation. They were ways you learned to survive in environments where being fully yourself did not feel safe. This realization can be painful because it makes you question what you thought was your personality. You may start seeing that your constant patience was sometimes fear of conflict. Your silence was sometimes fear of rejection. Your hard work was sometimes fear of being seen as worthless. Your need to be understood was sometimes fear of being abandoned. Your habit of caring everyone was sometimes fear that love would disappear if you stopped being useful. And when these truths rise, the old identity begins to loosen. It no longer feels noble in the same way. It no longer feels solid. It starts to feel like clothing that once protected you from the cold but now no longer lets you breathe. This is why the dark night can make a person feel lost even when nothing visible has changed. The job may still be there. The relationship may still be there. The house, the phone, the routine, the responsibilities may still be there. But the inner meaning has changed. The role no longer feels alive. The person you were performing no longer feels true. And without that role, you may feel as if you are disappearing. This is one of the most misunderstood parts of transformation. People often think losing yourself means weakness, but sometimes what you are losing is the false self. Sometimes the part that is falling apart was never your deepest truth. It was a structure built during pain. It was a way to survive childhood, rejection, pressure, comparison, loneliness, or emotional neglect. It helped you get through certain chapters. It kept you moving when you did not know how else to live. So the dark night is not asking you to hate your old self. That version of you deserves compassion. That version survived. That version carried you through days you did not know how to name. But survival is not the same as freedom. And at some point, life begins to ask whether you want to keep living from the same old wound. The old identity may have protected you, but it may also be limiting you. The helper may be loved but exhausted. The achiever may be admired but empty. The strong one may be respected but unseen. The quiet one may be accepted but unheard. The person who never complains may be easy to be around, but deeply alone. During the dark night, these roles start to feel too small because your inner life is asking for truth, not performance. You start noticing the cost of being the person everyone expects. You notice how much energy it takes to keep being okay. You notice how many times you say yes while your body says no. You notice how many times you keep peace outside while losing peace inside. You notice how many times you make yourself smaller so others do not feel uncomfortable. And once you notice this, the old role loses its innocence. It no longer feels like who you are. It feels like a prison built from other people's comfort. This is why the dark night can bring a deep sense of inner rebellion. Not loud rebellion, not dramatic rebellion, but a quiet refusal. A refusal to keep living as a character in someone else's story. A refusal to keep being valued only for what you provide. A refusal to keep calling it love when your soul feels drained. A refusal to keep confusing being needed with being known. This refusal may begin quietly. You may not announce it, you may not explain it, but inside something changes. The old version of you starts losing authority. The voice that once told you to keep going, keep smiling, keep proving, keep pleasing, keep hiding, begins to sound weaker. Another voice begins to appear, a slower voice, a clearer voice, a voice that asks, what is true? What do you actually feel? What do you need? What are you tired of carrying? What kind of life would remain if fear was no longer making the choices? These questions can feel dangerous because they threaten everything built on your silence. They may threaten relationships, they may threaten routines, they may threaten the image people have of you, they may threaten the future you planned when you did not yet know yourself. But these questions also begin the return to something real. They pull you away from automatic living. They pull you away from inherited dreams. They pull you away from the belief that your value depends on being easy, useful, impressive, or endlessly available. And yet, this stage is not simple. When the old identity breaks, the mind becomes afraid. It wants to grab something quickly. It wants a new label, a new plan, a new explanation, a new belief, a new person, a new goal, anything that can replace the old structure. This is because uncertainty feels like danger to a mind that was trained to survive through control. The mind would rather have a painful identity than no identity at all. It would rather know how to suffer than face the unknown path of healing. This is why many people try to rebuild too fast during the dark night. They rush into new distractions. They rush into new relationships. They rush into new goals. They try to turn pain into a quick lesson before they have truly felt it. They try to explain the transformation before they have lived it. But the dark night does not move according to the mind's timeline. It does not give instant answers just because discomfort is hard. It often leaves you in the space of not knowing long enough for your need for false certainty to break. This leads into another deep change. The dark night turns you into someone who stops needing every answer. Before this season, you may have believed that peace comes from understanding everything. You may have believed that if you could only know why something happened, you would finally feel free. Why did they leave? Why did they change? Why did the friendship fade? Why did the relationship fail? Why did your effort not matter? Why did your life take that turn? Why did you suffer when you were only trying to do your best? These questions can become a prison. They can keep the mind circling the same pain, searching for a sentence that will make the wound feel fair. But some wounds do not become fair just because you understand them. Some people cannot give closure because they do not understand themselves. Some endings do not arrive with clean answers. Some losses remain painful even after you know the reason. Some chapters only reveal their meaning after enough time has passed for your heart to stop demanding justice from the past. The dark night slowly teaches you this. At first, you may fight it. You may replay conversations, you may search for signs, you may analyze every detail. You may wonder what you missed, what you should have done, what could have changed, what the hidden reason was. The mind does this because it believes control will return if the story makes sense. But the soul does not heal through control alone, it heals through surrender to what is real. And what is real is often this: you may never receive the answer you wanted, but you can still become free. This is not easy to accept. It can feel unfair. It can feel like life is asking you to move forward with missing pages. But this is one of the secret lessons of the Dark Night. You do not need every page in order to continue. You do not need every apology in order to heal. You do not need every person to explain themselves before you choose peace. You do not need perfect closure before you begin again. This does not mean you ignore truth. It does not mean you accept disrespect. It does not mean you stop learning from what happened. It means you stop making your freedom depend on someone else's honesty. You stop placing your peace in the hands of people who may never have the maturity to tell the truth. You stop waiting for life to explain every painful turn before you allow yourself to breathe. This is where patience begins to replace control. Not weak patience, not passive patience, but the deep patience of someone who understands that meaning sometimes grows slowly. Some lessons are not understood in the moment because the nervous system is still in survival. Some truths cannot be heard while the heart is still defending itself. Some wisdom only appears after the first storm has passed. The Dark Night teaches you to live inside unanswered questions without letting them destroy you. It teaches you to carry uncertainty without turning it into self-hate. It teaches you to admit, "I do not understand this yet," and still take one small step. That is not weakness. That is a mature kind of strength. Many people never reach this point because they spend their whole lives demanding that pain explain itself immediately. But the deepest pain often changes a person before it explains itself. It strips away illusions first. It removes false identity first. It breaks the need for control first. Only later does meaning begin to form. This is why the dark night can feel so empty. You are not yet receiving answers. You are being prepared to live without the false ones. Before the dark night, you may have accepted easy explanations just to feel better. You may have told yourself that a relationship was fine because admitting the truth would hurt. You may have told yourself that your dreams were still alive because letting them die felt like failure. You may have told yourself that a person cared because their absence was too painful to face. You may have told yourself that staying was loyalty, when deep down it was fear. These explanations helped you survive, but they also kept you asleep. The dark night removes them. It does not always replace them right away. That is why it feels like nothing is left. But this emptiness has a purpose. It creates space where truth can finally enter. If the mind is full of old stories, there is no room for deeper clarity. If the heart is full of denial, there is no room for honest grief. If your life is full of roles, there is no room for your real self to breathe. So the dark night clears the space, and in that space you meet the unknown. At first, the unknown feels like a threat. Later, it becomes a teacher. It teaches you that you can survive without controlling everything. You can keep living without knowing every reason. You can be in the middle of a chapter and still be worthy. You can be unfinished and still be real. You can be confused and still be growing. This is a powerful shift because the old self often needed certainty to feel safe. It needed labels. It needed timelines, it needed promises, it needed people to act in predictable ways. But life is not always predictable, and people are not always honest, and healing does not always follow a straight line. The dark night teaches you to stop fighting reality just because reality is uncomfortable. It teaches you to stop saying, "This should not be happening," and start asking, "What is this revealing?" It teaches you to stop asking every painful event to disappear and start noticing what it is exposing. Maybe the loss is exposing where you gave too much power away. Maybe the silence is exposing how deeply you feared being alone. Maybe the failure is exposing that your value was attached to performance. Maybe the betrayal is exposing that you trusted someone's words more than their pattern. Maybe the emptiness is exposing that your old life was full but not meaningful. These realizations do not arrive all at once. They arrive slowly, often after many nights of confusion. And this is why the flow of the dark night cannot be rushed. It is not a quick motivational change. It is a deep inner restructuring. The person you were is being questioned at the root. The goals you chased, the people you trusted, the masks you wore, the beliefs you carried, the fears you obeyed, all begin to pass through fire. What is false begins to burn. What is real begins to remain. But in the middle of that process, it can feel like everything is burning. This is why compassion is needed. A person going through the dark night does not need shallow advice. They do not need to be told to just think positive, move on, or be grateful. Gratitude can be real, but it cannot be used to silence grief. Positive thinking can help, but it cannot replace truth. Moving forward matters, but it cannot happen deeply if the wound is only being hidden. The dark night asks for honesty, not performance. It asks you to feel what you actually feel without turning every emotion into shame. And that leads to the next change. When you stop fighting the unknown, your relationship with pain begins to change. Pain is no longer only an enemy. It becomes a message. It becomes a signal that something inside you needs attention. It becomes a doorway into parts of yourself you ignored because life demanded that you keep functioning. Before the dark night, you may have treated pain as something to hide, fix, numb, or explain away. You may have stayed busy to avoid sadness. You may have used people to avoid loneliness. You may have used achievement to avoid emptiness. You may have used control to avoid fear. But during the dark night, the old escapes often stop working. The distraction does not distract. The praise does not satisfy. The conversation does not fill the emptiness. The routine does not silence the ache. This forces you into a deeper relationship with yourself. You begin to feel emotions you once outran. You begin to notice grief that was buried under responsibility. You begin to recognize anger that was hidden under politeness. You begin to feel loneliness that was covered by constant availability. You begin to see fear that was disguised as planning. This can feel overwhelming, but it is also honest. For the first time, pain is not being pushed into the basement of your life. It is being brought into the room, and when pain is finally seen, it can begin to change shape. Not immediately, not perfectly, but slowly. You learn that sadness can be felt without becoming your whole identity. You learn that fear can be present without making every decision. You learn that grief can move through you without proving that your life is over. You learn that loneliness can be painful without meaning you are unlovable. You learn that emptiness can be a clearing, not only a punishment. This is where strength becomes quieter. It is no longer the strength of pretending, it is the strength of staying present, the strength of not running back to what broke you just because being alone feels hard, the strength of not begging for answers from people who only offer confusion, the strength of not rebuilding the same false identity just because the unknown feels uncomfortable, the strength of letting the old self dissolve without rushing to create another mask. This is the part of the dark night that many people never see. From the outside, it may look like nothing is happening. A person may become quieter, they may respond less, they may step back from old circles, they may lose interest in things they once chased. But inside, a deep transformation is taking place. They are learning to stop performing. They are learning to stop living from old fear. They are learning to stop confusing emotional chaos with love, pressure with purpose, and approval with worth. They are learning that the self they thought they lost may not have been the real self at all. It may have been the version built for survival. And now, beneath all the pain, beneath the silence, beneath the unanswered questions, another self is beginning to breathe. Not a perfect self, not a fearless self, not a self that has everything figured out, but a more honest self. A self that can no longer pretend fake peace is enough. A self that can no longer wear an identity that suffocates the soul. A self that can no longer demand every answer before taking one step toward truth. And this is where the dark night becomes less like destruction and more like a painful awakening. It breaks the habit of lying to yourself. It breaks the role that kept you trapped. It breaks the need for perfect closure. It breaks the belief that you must understand everything before you can begin healing. It brings you to the edge of everything familiar and quietly asks whether you are ready to live without the mask. And once that question has been heard, life cannot return to the same shape. You may still feel afraid, you may still feel uncertain, you may still miss the comfort of who you used to be, but deep inside you know the old way is over. You know the old pretending cannot hold you anymore. You know the old identity cannot carry your future. You know the old answers are too small for the truth you are beginning to touch. And as this truth becomes stronger, your relationship with pain begins to change even more, because the darkness that once felt like an ending slowly starts revealing the parts of you that were waiting underneath it. And when you stop fighting the unknown, your relationship with pain begins to change, because pain is no longer just a thing you want to escape, it becomes a thing you begin to understand. This is one of the deepest changes that happens during the dark night of the soul. It does not make you cold. It does not make you empty. It does not turn you into a person who feels nothing. In fact, it often does the opposite. It makes you feel more clearly than before. It makes you face the emotions you once buried under work, noise, other people, busy days, forced smiles, and quiet distractions. Before this season, you may have believed that being strong meant never breaking down. You may have thought strength meant hiding your sadness, controlling your fear, staying useful, staying calm, and acting like nothing touched you deeply. But the dark night begins to show you that this kind of strength is often just silence with pain underneath it. It shows you that hiding an emotion does not remove it. It only sends it deeper. It shows you that sadness ignored for too long becomes heaviness. Loneliness ignored for too long becomes numbness. Fear ignored for too long becomes control. Anger ignored for too long becomes distance. Grief ignored for too long becomes a quiet wall between you and life. So the dark night brings these emotions back to the surface. At first, this feels heavy. It may feel as if everything you avoided has arrived at the same time. You may feel tired without knowing why. You may feel grief over things you thought you had already moved past. You may feel pain over people you told yourself you no longer cared about. You may feel fear about a future that once looked clear. You may feel empty even when nothing is visibly wrong. But this does not mean you are failing. It means your inner life is finally becoming honest. For a long time, you may have lived by escaping what hurt. You may have distracted yourself from sadness. You may have kept company around you so you did not have to meet your loneliness. You may have chased goals so you did not have to feel your emptiness. You may have helped others so you did not have to sit with your own wounds. You may have stayed busy because silence felt too dangerous. But the dark night removes many of those hiding places. It brings you to a point where the old escape no longer works. The phone does not comfort you the same way. The praise does not reach the same place. The conversations feel lighter than the pain inside you. The routines keep moving, but your soul stays still. And in that stillness, the pain you avoided begins to speak. This is where many people misunderstand the process. They think pain means they are becoming weaker. They think crying means they are losing control. They think feeling deeply means they are going backward. But feeling pain is not the same as being destroyed by pain. There is a difference between being visited by grief and becoming grief. There is a difference between feeling fear and letting fear rule every choice. There is a difference between feeling empty and deciding that emptiness is the final truth of your life. The Dark Night teaches you this difference slowly. It teaches you that an emotion can pass through you without becoming your name. It teaches you that a painful thought can appear without being obeyed. It teaches you that a dark feeling can rise without becoming your identity. This is not easy. Some days the pain feels louder than your wisdom. Some days the fear feels more real than hope. Some days loneliness feels like proof that nobody will ever truly understand you. But over time you begin to notice something powerful. The feeling comes and you are still here. The thought appears and you do not have to follow it. The sadness rises and it does not erase your dignity. The fear speaks and you can still take one small step. This is how pain begins to lose control over you. Not because it disappears, but because you stop worshiping it as the whole truth. You learn to sit with discomfort without immediately running to the old habits that once gave temporary relief. You do not need to text the wrong person just because you feel lonely. You do not need to return to a harmful place just because silence feels heavy. You do not need to prove yourself just because insecurity appears. You do not need to numb yourself just because sadness visits at night. You do not need to destroy your peace just because your mind is loud for a moment. This is emotional maturity. It is not the absence of pain. It is the ability to feel pain without handing it the steering wheel of your life. And this kind of maturity is born slowly in the dark. It is born when you stop calling every painful emotion a weakness. It is born when you stop treating your own heart like a problem to be solved. It is born when you begin to understand that sadness is not shameful. Loneliness is not failure. Fear is not proof that you are not strong. Emptiness is not proof that life is over. These emotions are signals. They show you where you have been wounded. They show you where you have been pretending. They show you where you have given too much. They show you where you stopped listening to yourself. When the dark night deepens, you begin to see that pain often carries information. The grief may be telling you that you loved deeply. The anger may be telling you that a boundary was crossed. The loneliness may be telling you that you have been around people who never truly met you. The emptiness may be telling you that your life was full of activity but low in meaning. The fear may be telling you that your old identity is dying and the new one is not fully formed yet. Once you understand this, pain becomes less like an enemy and more like a doorway. It still hurts. It still demands honesty. It still asks for patience. But it no longer has the same power to make you abandon yourself. This is where the person inside you begins to change. You become less reactive. You become slower to give your peace away. You become more aware of what your emotions are trying to show you. You stop believing every dark thought just because it enters your mind. You stop building your future from one painful night. You stop making permanent decisions from temporary storms. You start giving yourself space before reacting. You start asking what you actually need instead of running toward what feels familiar. You start noticing the difference between a true warning and an old wound speaking. This is one of the quiet gifts of the dark night. It teaches you to live with depth without drowning in it. It teaches you to feel deeply without losing yourself completely. And once pain no longer controls you the same way, your values become clearer, because pain has a way of burning away what never truly mattered. Before the dark night, you may care deeply about how your life looks to others. You may want people to think you are stable, successful, happy, chosen, strong. You may want your life to appear peaceful, even if your inner world is tired. You may want the relationship to look loyal, even if it feels lonely. You may want your achievements to look impressive, even if they cost your health, your joy, and your sense of self. You may want others to see you as fine, because admitting the truth would make everything too real. But after the dark night, image begins to lose its power. The applause that once mattered begins to feel distant. The approval that once fed you begins to feel too small. The outside picture no longer satisfies you if the inside truth is painful. This is not because you stop caring about life. It is because you start caring about what is real. You no longer want to look healed while staying broken in private. You no longer want to look loved while feeling unseen. You no longer want to look successful while feeling spiritually empty. You no longer want to look strong while betraying your own needs. This is where your values begin to shift. You start choosing honesty over performance. You start choosing depth over attention. You start choosing peace over popularity. You start choosing alignment over approval. The things you once tolerated begin to feel unbearable, not because you became dramatic, but because your inner standard changed. You can no longer pay the old price for acceptance. You can no longer pretend that being admired is the same as being at peace. You can no longer stay in spaces where your soul has to shrink in order to belong. This is why the dark night often changes what you want from life. Before, you may have wanted to be seen as important. Now you want to feel real. Before, you may have wanted to be chosen by others. Now you want to stop abandoning yourself. Before, you may have wanted a life people could praise. Now you want a life your heart can actually live in. This shift may confuse people around you. They may not understand why you care less about things you once chased. They may not understand why certain friendships no longer feel right. They may not understand why you are no longer impressed by shallow attention. They may not understand why you are quieter, more careful, more selective, and less available for empty noise. Some may say you changed too much. Some may say you became distant. Some may say you are taking life too seriously. But often what they call distance is actually discernment. What they call change is actually honesty. What they call seriousness is actually self-respect. The dark night does not make you hate the world. It makes you stop selling your inner life for a place in it. You begin to understand that the image people praise can become a cage if it is not connected to truth. You begin to understand that a life can look full and still feel empty. A person can be surrounded and still feel alone. A relationship can look beautiful and still be emotionally unsafe. A goal can bring success and still have no meaning. A smile can be admired and still hide exhaustion. Once you see this clearly, you stop building your life for the eyes of others. You start building it for the quiet truth inside you. And because your values change, your relationships change too. This is another part of the dark night that can feel painful, because not every person can come with you into your honest life. Some people only knew the version of you that was easy to manage. Some people only loved the version of you that never questioned them. Some people only respected the version of you that kept giving without asking for anything back. Some people only felt comfortable with the version of you that stayed silent when hurt. So when you begin to value truth over image, those relationships begin to reveal their real shape. You may notice who listens when you speak honestly and who becomes defensive. You may notice who respects your boundaries and who calls them selfish. You may notice who cares about your healing and who only cares about getting the old version of you back. This is where you stop begging to be understood. Before the dark night, you may have explained yourself again and again. You may have used long messages to prove your heart was pure. You may have tried to make people understand how much they hurt you. You may have begged for emotional honesty from people who only gave confusion. You may have believed that if you could just find the right words, they would finally see you. But the dark night teaches you a truth that is painful and freeing at the same time. Some people do not misunderstand you because your words are unclear. They misunderstand you because understanding you would require them to face themselves. They would have to admit what they did. They would have to see how much you carried. They would have to recognize how comfortable they were with your silence. And not everyone is willing to do that. This is why over-explaining becomes exhausting. You are not only trying to communicate, you are trying to awaken something in another person that they may not want to open. The dark night teaches you to stop doing that. It teaches you that your pain does not become real only when someone agrees with it. Your truth does not need a witness to exist. Your healing does not need permission from the people who benefited from your wounds. This does not make you cruel, it makes you free. You stop handing your emotional reality to people who treat it like a debate. You stop begging people to see your heart when they only want access to your energy. You stop trying to prove that your boundaries are fair to people who enjoyed your lack of boundaries. You stop explaining the same wound to someone who keeps touching it, and slowly you understand that not everyone deserves access to your inner world. Your deepest thoughts are not for people who use them against you. Your pain is not for people who turn it into weakness. Your softness is not for people who only value it when it serves them. Your story is not for people who listen only to defend themselves. This is one of the quietest but strongest changes after the dark night. You become more private, more careful, more grounded. You no longer feel the need to correct every false opinion about you. You no longer chase every person who walks away with the wrong version of your story. You no longer exhaust yourself trying to be understood by people who are committed to misunderstanding you. Not because you hate them, not because you are above them, but because you finally understand your own experience. You know what happened inside you, you know what you felt, you know what you survived, you know what you need now. And that knowing becomes enough. This is when the outside world may see you as colder, but the truth is deeper. You are not colder, you are clearer. You are not empty, you are no longer leaking your soul into places that never held it with care. You are not heartless. You are learning that your heart needs protection, not endless exposure. The person who comes out of the dark night is often quieter, but that quietness is not weakness. It is the quietness of someone who has seen what chaos can do. It is the quietness of someone who no longer needs to prove every truth out loud. It is the quietness of someone who has learned that peace is often built in private. This version of you becomes calmer because you have already met parts of yourself that once scared you. You become selective because you know what false connection costs. You become slower to trust because you no longer confuse intensity with safety. You become harder to control because fear has already taken you to your lowest place and you survived it. This is why people may feel different around you after the dark night. The old tools no longer work on you the same way. Guilt does not pull you back as easily. Flattery does not blind you as quickly. Silent treatment does not make you chase as desperately. Confusion does not keep you trapped as long. Pressure does not make you abandon your truth as fast. You have been through the inner collapse of needing everyone to approve of you, and once that need breaks, people lose the power they once had over your choices. This does not mean you become hard in a bitter way. It means your softness gains structure, your kindness gains boundaries, your patience gains wisdom, your love gains self-respect. You still care, but you no longer disappear inside your caring. You still feel deeply, but you no longer let every feeling decide your future. You still listen, but you no longer turn your life into a home for people who refuse to grow. This is the kind of strength that does not need to announce itself. It is not loud. It does not need revenge. It does not need to prove that it is strong. It does not need to make others feel small. It simply moves differently. When something is not aligned, it steps back. When respect is missing, it creates distance. When words do not match patterns, it trusts the pattern. When love begins to cost self-betrayal, it chooses peace. This is what makes the post-Dark Night version of a person harder to control. They are not controlled by the same hunger for approval. They are not controlled by the same fear of being alone. They are not controlled by the same need to be understood by everyone. They are not controlled by the same addiction to looking okay. They have seen what happens when a person lives too long away from themselves, and they are not willing to go back there. The dark night does not turn you into someone bitter. It turns you into someone awake, someone who can see through illusions faster, someone who can notice when affection is mixed with control, someone who can hear the difference between apology and accountability. Someone who can feel the difference between closeness and emotional dependence. Someone who can recognize when peace is real and when it is only silence covering pain. This awakening may not look dramatic from the outside. You may not become louder. You may not become more impressive. You may not become the person everyone expected you to become, but you become more grounded, more honest, more difficult to manipulate, more connected to the truth of your own life. And maybe that is the real transformation. The dark night of the soul does not turn you into a perfect person. It turns you into a real one, a person who no longer survives through pretending, a person who no longer confuses noise with purpose, a person who no longer gives their whole life away just to be accepted. The darkness did not come to erase you. It came to remove everything that was never truly you. It came to remove the mask that kept you liked but unseen. It came to remove the identity that kept you praised but trapped. It came to remove the need for answers that kept you circling the past. It came to remove the fear that made you abandon yourself in the name of peace. And when that process ends, you may not look like the old version of yourself. You may not want the same things. You may not move with the same urgency. You may not explain yourself to the same people. You may not tolerate the same patterns. But what remains is stronger because it is honest. What remains is calmer because it no longer needs to perform. What remains is freer because it no longer runs from its own truth. The person who walks out of the dark night is not searching for themselves in every person, every title, every achievement, and every outside approval anymore. They have finally stopped running from who they were always meant to become. Maybe the dark night of the soul was never meant to destroy you. Maybe it came to show you the parts of yourself that were tired of pretending, tired of chasing, tired of carrying a life that looked fine on the outside but felt heavy inside. It may have taken away your old comfort, your old identity, and your old answers, but it also gave you something deeper. It gave you honesty. It gave you clarity. It gave you the strength to face pain without becoming it. And perhaps the most powerful truth is this: the darkness did not erase you. It revealed you. It removed the false peace, the forced smiles, the need for approval, and the version of you that kept abandoning itself just to be accepted. So if you are walking through your own dark night right now, remember this: you are not at the end of your story. You are standing in the painful middle, where the old self falls away and the real self begins to rise. And one day when you look back, you may realize that the season you thought was breaking you was actually teaching you how to come home to yourself. If this message touched something deep inside you, share your thoughts in the comments and tell us what the dark night taught you about yourself. Like this video if it helped you, and share it with someone who may be silently going through their own darkness right now. And if you want more calm, deep, and honest reflections like this, subscribe to the channel and stay connected. Because sometimes one honest message can remind someone that their darkness is not the end of their story. It may be the beginning of their return.